Good afternoon, my name is Trina O'Connor and today I'd like to give my point of view on criminality in Ireland. Primarily I'm going to focus on Dublin and on the north side of Dublin. I live and work on the north side of Dublin, and for the last number of years I've been working in inner city Dublin. And in my work I've dealt a lot with 16 to 21-year-old youths and helped them to navigate their way from second chance education into working environments or into further education. So inner city Dublin, unfortunately, over the last number of years has suffered from an increase in criminal activity, primarily drug dealing and violent activity. And in 2016, we had a major escalation of this criminal activity when a feud broke out between two criminal gangs, one being an international cartel and one being a local family. And to date, 18 people have died because of the violence that has come from this feud over drug dealing and turf wars. So the young people I work with very often will come from quite chaotic backgrounds. Some come from the care system, some come from families where addiction and health issues are very prevalent. Some are carers themselves, they may care for their parents or their grandparents or indeed their siblings. Some will also come from situations where they may not have ever had a chance of education. Some of the young people come to me at 16 but have a reading age of 9 because mainstream education really failed them. So this is their second chance to try and get themselves an education in order to progress themselves in a very positive way, as opposed to in a negative way by getting involved in criminal activity. So for many people, they, I suppose, can't understand the lure of criminal activity because they have never been exposed to it. But when you come from a background where criminal activity is perceived as the norm in some cases, it can be almost like an apprenticeship. So what attracts young people to get involved in criminal gangs? Well, it's my view that for some of these young people, these criminal gangs almost become like surrogate families, because if they come from a less than perfect upbringing and their family is dysfunctional and they don't feel like they're cared for within their family, then being part of a gang who will give you the impression that they care for you, even though we know that these young people are being used by the people who head up these gangs as just, collateral damage, and they're people who are indispensable, they're just foot soldiers, they move around money, drugs, guns. But for that young person, it can feel like they're being cared for because they're being given, rewards for the work that they do for these criminal gangs. For some of these young people also, they might feel safer as part of a gang depending on the environment where they live and the community where they live. Because quite recently I spoke to a mother who is rearing a teenage boy. She's a lone parent. She's in a working class area of Dublin. Her son is 16. On a daily basis he runs the gauntlet of gangs of youths trying to get him to get involved in their activities. And he is, I suppose, abused verbally on a daily basis by these street corner gangs because he's not involved and he is just trying to stay in education, and for him it is a challenge. And you know yourself how challenging it can be to be a teenager, to try and find your place in the world, to try and find, where you fit in, what you want to do with your life, how you want to achieve success. And if you have people trying to drag you into the murky world of criminality, and you might have the opinion that there is a lack of opportunity for you, you can see how young people can very often get dragged into something that is much bigger than them, and before they know it, they're involved in something that they might find it very difficult to get out of. So for these young people, the family tradition of criminality in some sections of our working class communities can be a difficult cycle to break. So what can we do in terms of community responses? So in the northeast inner city, a group of community activists came together in response to the feud, and we spoke to all the local public representatives and politicians, and we asked them to engage with community organisations in order to develop a plan. And in fairness to the Taoiseach, which is the Irish Prime Minister, he came down, got involved, spoke with local activists and spoke with local businesses, people who work in the community and people who live in the community. and he commissioned a report, the Mulvey Report. And the North Inner City Community Coalition of community activists and organisations and businesses also produced a report. And since this report has been produced, a task force has been developed for the Northeast Inner City, which is brilliant news. And it's been up and running now for nearly 2 years, and it's chaired by a volunteer chairman who's very dedicated to his role, and he has created structures which has allowed us to look at the complexities of criminality in the area. So we are now looking at how we can do early intervention and preventative work in order to create an environment that allows for opportunity for young people, as opposed to what's happened over the last 30 to 40 years in the Northeast Inner City, whereby successive governments have left the community to fend for itself in terms of dealing with some of the issues around drug addiction and criminality which comes with chaotic environments. So this has been a good news story for the Northeast Inner City, and it's a work in progress. It's a platform to build on in terms of early intervention work. It also allows us to create aspirations for young people growing up in the area, as opposed to what many people who have grown up in the area have had, which is, labelling that they are a certain type of person, and therefore they cannot aspire to be maybe a solicitor or maybe a judge or maybe a guard. So we're very hopeful going forward that using this holistic approach of dealing with criminality will allow for an environment to flourish that stops the intimidation, that stops the open drug dealing, and the support of the guards in terms of how they work and how they interact with the local community has been, you can't measure the results, because the chief superintendent in the local Garda station has almost taken this on as a personal crusade, which is brilliant. He's brought in new guards into the area, the way that they are trained in terms of the interactions that they have with local people, the interaction that they have with young people. It's been a very positive couple of years since the NEIC task force has been set up. Now we've a long way to go, because it's been generational and it's been, years of deprivation in that area. But I do think that the future is bright for the Northeast Inner City, as long as this type of intervention progresses and continues and grows and strengthens people's resolve in the area. However, it still leaves us with these young people who may be growing up in a situation where neurologically they may not have the capacity to act in a pro-social way, because they're through vicarious learning, they have learned behaviours, they may have a collective low self-esteem amongst their peers. They may think that the only options that they have to be successful is to get involved in criminal activity. So what do? Well, there's a couple of things we can do. We can look at creating partnerships to education. We can look at creating environments where opportunities and options become realities, rather than just a paper saying that there are opportunities for you. We can create a safety net around these young people. If we know that the outcomes for young people who come from the backgrounds that I've mentioned before can very often be criminal activity, well then we can intervene. We can create restorative justice programs whereby young people can see the impact of their criminal activity and hopefully learn through them processes that this is not the road that they should take, and that there are other real opportunities. We can look at identifying new ways of reaching those young people, particularly people in addiction or people who feel overwhelmed by a lack of wealth, or people who are disenfranchised. However, in Ireland right now, we do have a problem with disenfranchised youth. And two of them cohorts of people that I will mention is, one, young people who are growing up in homelessness, and 2 young people that are grown up in direct provision. So in Ireland, like many countries across Europe, we have a growing problem with homelessness. For young people to grow up in a homeless situation or in a hotel like we have in Ireland or in a homeless hub, this in itself can create a perfect storm of poor emotional intelligence, and young people can suffer psychologically from the effects of not knowing whether they will have a safe place to live growing up. And I suppose that leads me on to a report that was issued last week by the Policing Authority of Ireland, and this was a review that was done of the Garda diversion projects for youths, and it was found that there was 8,000 cases that weren't prosecuted, and there was 3,000 victims of crime. And in that regard, the Garda Commissioner Drew Harris issued an apology to them victims of crime, and rightly so in my view, but that's not all of the picture, because the victims of crime are very, very important, and some might argue that the youths that were let down by these Garda diversion programmes are also the victims of crime, because some of the reports were, for example, one child was failed 37 times by the Garda diversion project. They had 37 referrals and still had no intervention, and 57 young people have died in the 7 years that were audited in this report. And over 900 children that were recorded have had 3+ offences to their name and still didn't receive the interventions of Garda diversion projects. So the net widening and the safety net of Garda diversion seems to have failed on this occasion. But the positive from this is that the Commissioner Drew Harris is looking at doing an audit of these services, and hopefully there will be some learning from this, and hopefully we'll get new processes that can create new interventions, and in my view earlier interventions to stop young people getting involved in more serious crime as they progress towards adulthood.